What's up guys, Sub-Zero here for my rundown of the patch 13.8 rundown. I don't usually do these, but I had some extra time today, so I thought I would go over the patch. And I'm also excited to see how the meta is going to get shifted up, especially after, you've had this somewhat long patch that I think a lot of people have complained to get about. Some, complaints definitely valid, other complaints a little bit weird. But in any case, let's get into the changes and my thoughts on all of them. So let's start off with aces, now require dealing damage to execute. This basically is just because Ox Force is going to work differently. Doesn't really seem like it's going to be a huge change to ace in general. Slight nerf if they're shooting on a shield, but honestly, like kind of buff in that Misfortune's going to actually be able to chew through Ox Force units and now not just get stuck on them and they say Ox DD. So, completely reasonable. I think makes a lot of sense with how they're changing Ox Force. All right, one of the biggest changes in the entire patch, let's get right into it, Hacker. So the Hacker Omnivamp, so this is the Omnivamp for all the hackers, is getting cut by a huge amount, 20% at the first two levels and then 10% at the last level. And the Rider Omnivamp is also going now. So if you only have 3 hacker and the Rider gets 0% Omnivamp if they're not a hacker, and then down to 15% at the next level. And the last thing is that hacker targeting is getting completely changed. So instead of prioritizing the back row, it's just going to prioritize the closest unit. So this is interesting, right? This is very interesting. I mean, one, they're hitting the hacker Omnivamp really, really hard, which I think makes a lot of sense. There were some very egregious fights where you would just see LeBlanc just healing to full when she was ulting late into a fight, so I think that makes a ton of sense. And then the other big thing is the actual targeting change, which, honestly, if you position poorly, you're still going to get hackered. If they put a hacker right on your backline, it's still going to jump on your backline and kill it. This is just going to sort of change some of the counterplay around hacker. You're not going to have to do sort of weird positioning here. Honestly, let me pull up Team Builder because I think... All right, so we're in Team Builder. So Hacker LeBlanc, right? Previously, you could position versus a Hacker LeBlanc. Say you're playing like some kind of sure shot board, though this is not accounting for any Infinity portals. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. But like say these are 3 backliners, and then you have maybe an Echo, which maybe you can fit into the comp. I don't know, this is a weird example. Let's say there's a Hacker LeBlanc, and you put this Echo in this back corner here. What this would do normally versus Hacker is LeBlanc goes da-da-da-da-da, and then she sees, hey, there's a unit in the 4th row, I'm going to target them. And so she'll end up targeting this as this Echo, or she might end up targeting this Sivir, but ideally she targets the Sivir and then she aggroes onto the Echo. There's lots of other things you can do with hackers, like there was that Joe Bookmark game that we watched earlier on my stream, and I posted the VOD to YouTube, check that out. Where he basically would block in a melee unit like this, though he had target dummies, so that LeBlanc would chew through the Sivir, and then would have to chew through this Echo. Now, what's different here? Okay, so what's different here now is that if Echo walks all the way up here, or even say like if you full clump in such a way that Echo ends up here, but that he did not start on the last row, so say you do some kind of positioning like this perhaps, and Echo walks up like this, LeBlanc will end up targeting Echo instead of prioritizing the Sivir here, if somehow Echo started here. But like you see how like I'm struggling to come up with examples where it's like completely changed. It will obviously make it a little bit easier to position around Hacker, but you're still probably going to have to do the same sort of things where you keep melee units in the back row because you still want them to be delayed in walking up enough that they end up here when LeBlanc comes down. So yeah, it's an interesting change. I think it's going to change up hacker positioning a decent bit, though I'm still honestly trying to figure it out. I guess the biggest thing is that now you can actually corner your carry if you really want to. You just have to make sure that you have a melee unit that is going to get delayed enough that it won't just straight walk to the front line, because LeBlanc is going to have some travel time. If you position, say, exactly like this, and they put their LeBlanc here, what's going to happen is LeBlanc's going to go da-da-da-da-da-da, and then by the time she is hit there, Echo's already walked to the front line, and she's just going to go onto your back line. So you'll still probably have to position in similar ways where you sort of trap an Echo unit so that he has to walk up here and then boom, ends up here, and then she targets the Echo and then Sivir and then Samir and all that kind of stuff. So the big change I would say is the change to the Omnivamp, which I think is a very good one. I think it's going to hit Hacker really, really hard because, I mean, this is a lot of healing they're losing. And this is honestly a comp that I think people had already sort of started to figure out how to position versus how to beat. So I do think this is actually going to push it like basically out of the meta. unless there's a really high roll LeBlanc game where you high roll LeBlanc 2 really early or like perfect items. I think it'll put LeBlanc and other hacker carries in the spot where they honestly should be, where if you high roll really hard, you can play them, but it's not going to be like there's 3 LeBlanc players in every single lobby. So I think that's for the best, honestly. But like like I said, this comp was already sort of starting to get figured out. So I do think there's a chance that this comp just gets completely knocked out of the meta because people already started to figure it out with such a huge nerf. It might just not be very playable outside of like a very high roll, but maybe people enjoy that. I think people don't like getting hackered. Hearts AP per cast at 6 heart getting buffed by 1, I think perfect. I had a game in tournament actually where I really considered and actually did end up cutting 6 hearts just because I felt like an extra 3 AP per cast is really not enough to justify playing. At that point in the game, it was Lulu Pantheon at level 8. Like, really? Can I justify playing these bad units for such a small increase in AP? Now that it's 4 AP, an extra 4 AP for cast, I think that'll be a little bit more reasonable. So, I like that a lot. Infiniteam nerfs at 5 and 7 Infiniteam. Chef's Kiss, perfect again. I do think Infiniteam with the +1 was just too strong with the spikes that 5 and 7 gave you. So, small nerfs to both of those I think is absolutely appropriate. Okay. Here is the other big trait change, and this is the Oxforce rework. So Oxforce, now instead of becoming invincible, it now reads once per combat when they would drop below 1 health, instead shield themselves for 50% of their max HP for 1.5 seconds. So instead of your misfortune getting stuck on an invincible unit, she'll just have to burst through another 50% of their HP. I think this is a way more healthy state for the trait to be in. So yeah, this can actually be a buff in certain scenarios to Oxforce because the shield lasts for 1.5 seconds and the invulnerability only lasted for 1 second. So if you get the maximum usage out of the shield, you're actually getting another half second of time that your carry is alive or that your tank is alive. So to compensate for that, they are slightly nerfing armor and MR. I do think in general, though, this is going to be a nerf to Oxforce. Just not being able to infinitely tank like huge amounts of damage was, I mean, that was a big part of Oxforce. So I'm a little bit surprised to see the nerf as well. I feel like this is going to push Oxforce out as sort of like one of the primary front lines. You know, if you're playing like TF, you love to play like the 4 Oxforce variation of that. Maybe we'll see with AP comps back into sort of like an Annie, Echo, Alistar 2 Oxforce variation. I guess we'll see. But yeah, I'm a bit surprised actually that they're also nerfing Oxforce because this on its own seems to me to be like a pretty large nerf. But, you know, they're the devs, only time will tell. Underground, Tome of Traits no longer drops from Heist 4 or higher. This is just to prevent players from getting dizzy, which I think is fine. I mean, how many games are you going for Heist or higher if you're an Underground player? I guess a lot. I'm not an Underground player, so I think this is fine to make it a little bit easier to use those big heists, so I like that. All right, let's move on to the next slide. All right, so big changes to 1 cost. Blitzcrank was honestly doing so much work, you know, when the admin heart comp that I put out like really a while ago before this patch, my Blitzcrank was tanking so much in late game fights. Like I was just playing a Blitzcrank the entire game. Same thing in these like admin LeBlanc comps. Blitz was just one of the best 1 costs in the game. Couple that with, you know, either of his augments, either Rocket Grab or just give him the carry augment, slap a gargoyle on him and keep that for 4 or 5 stages. This was too strong of a unit, so I agree with this nerf. Gangplank, on the other hand, super weak. This is a unit that, like honestly, if you see Gangplank in your early shops, you just wish you didn't. So I'm quite happy with the Gangplank buffs as well. Make him a little more tanky and make him do some extra damage. So nice buff to Duelist. Also supers, but like honestly barely see people play supers at all. Maybe this will bring it back, but I really think it's a pretty small buff. I mean, 25 spell damage at 3-star is a reasonable buff, though you think about as a percentage of 525 is only 5%, so it's a little bit less than a 5% buff, so not a huge buff. So I think it'll bring him a little bit in the right direction. I did think an early Gangplank 2 wasn't the worst unit in the world, so this is at least something. I think it's in the correct direction. Big nerfs to Lucian as well. A ton of people complaining about this Quick Draw Renegade Lucian comp. Honestly, in the last days of the patch, I also didn't see this comp performing that well. I had a an interesting stream where I tried basically spamming this comp and it did not go very well. And then we played in Mecha Cup and I saw 1 or 2 games it would top 4. If you get like a pretty high roll, then you can definitely do well with it. But in general, I honestly saw this comp falling off a lot. This might be more of like a low elo nerf where like a lot of people are playing it in low elo, so they want to get rid of it. I'm not sure exactly because I honestly didn't think this comp was that egregious towards the end of the patch. I thought it was fine, but like, yeah, not great. So I think this is actually a bit of an over nerf, and the comp will be quite hard to play after this. But we'll see. We'll see. Lux buffs I think are good ever since they changed it so that she targets her target with her spell. It's been hard for her to, get through super tanky frontline, so she's kind of a weak item holder early game. At least she can kill units though. So I like the buff to Lux. I don't think they buffed Lux hero. Augment her carry augment, which is a bit surprised because that's one of the worst performing augments in the game. So I would like to see that buffed as well, but okay, that's life. And then the last big buff to a 1 cost is to Nasus. Huge buff, honestly. 50 extra HP, 5 armor and MR, and increases spells AD%. I mean, that's a big buff, but I completely agree with this. Nasus is super, super underperforming, partially because both of his verticals just aren't very good in the meta. You saw people hold Nasus a lot more when like Vex was super broken, but since they kneecapped Vex after her being broken, now you don't really care about holding an early Nasus. And then also Anima Squad is just not the strongest version of Misfortune that you can play. You'd much prefer to play the quick draw version with her. So I think Nasus, he really just sort of like lacked having an identity as far as a comp to play him in. Hopefully these buffs can get him to a point where he's strong enough early that maybe you're more happy about playing Anima Squad, but I don't know. I think Nasus's issue was not that he was a weak unit, it's that the comps that he would be played in were not very strong. But this will make him at least a little bit stronger as an early unit to play. So
way too dominant and way too
I like buffs to bad units. So I'm happy with this. I just don't know if it solves the exact problem that Nasus was having. This, though, does a little bit help solve the problem that Nasus was having. Jinx buffs as well, which will be another buff to Anima Squad. Prankster's in a really weird spot here where you don't want to ever play Prankster with Gnar. If people aren't aware, when you play around Gadgetines, Prankster actually disables the Gadgetine buff on your units. It's bugged that way. So like when one of your Pranksters turns into a dummy, you lose the damage reduction and damage boost that would be going to Gnar. So that's part of the reason why I think units like Jinx are underperforming, so you just don't want to put Prankster on your board. But I do think this is nice to help her a little bit in at least the Anima Squad comp, which, like I was saying, needs a little bit of love. So I like this, definitely. And with the extra AD, she can also hold AD items. Jinx is actually an interesting unit in that she's supposed to be the AD and AP item holder for the comp until you hit Vayne or Misfortune. So I like that she can fulfill both roles, and so I like giving her a little bit more AD. Tiny little hair nerf to Gnar here, and no nerf to Gadgetine in the patch is a little bit surprising. I think the idea is that with the reduction in Hacker, Gnar basically is going to lose 30% Omnivamp at 3 Hacker, which is a lot. I do think that means Gnar will still be playable. 30% Omnivamp is a lot, but in a lot of the early fights, if you saw like how 5 Gadgetine Gnar was doing, he didn't really need the Omnivamp, honestly. He needs it late game to really cap out, but I do think this comp will still be playable after the nerfs, just not multiple people playing it every game. Hopefully you're only playing it from a high roll spot, which is how TFT should be. You should only really play Gadgetine +1 if you start off with some Gadgetines or really good items for Gnar. You already have a Gnar, so I think this is a good nerf. And I think it toes the line decently of nerfing the comp and not making it completely unplayable, which I like. I don't really like balanced thrashing where this comp goes from the best comp of the game to completely unplayable. Kai'Sa nerfs as well. This was another egregiously overperforming 3-cost, one of the best 3-cost that you could 3-star outside of the hackers. So they are nerfing her spell damage actually a ton at 3 stars. So that's 40 damage reduction. That's over a 10% nerf, right? Yeah, so that's pretty big nerf to Kai'Sa 3. Hope that doesn't push her completely out of the meta because I thought she was a really cool reroll comp, and I love playing around Kai'Sa. I'm happy that she stayed in the mid set. She's a very fun unit to play around. This is a hefty nerf, so yeah, I hope she's still playable after this. She did feel quite strong on the patch, but this is a really, really big nerf. We'll see how the rest of the meta ends up sort of shaping out with what other comps end up coming to the meta and how Kai'Sa deals into them. And then the last buff on this page, it is a a quarter-second buff to Rammus's stun. Love this. I mean, Rammus is just completely underperforming, but I do think he's actually a bit of an underrated unit. I've had Rammus do quite well on my boards, just playing a 2-star Rammus if you hit them randomly, and sometimes a 3-star Rammus because he's so uncontested. So yeah, I do think this unit's a bit underplayed, and I think this will be a nice sort of placebo buff to make people more interested in playing Rammus. I mean, it is definitely a real buff, and it's helpful. So I think this actually puts Rammus in a good spot. We'll see if people end up playing around him more. He's a little bit awkward now that his brother Cho'Gath is gone, so it's like hard to like roll for Rammus 3 and what. So it's a bit awkward, but I do think that he's actually in a pretty decent spot. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. All right, and just a couple more changes. Nerf to Shen. He is getting nerfed at 3-star and buffed at 1-star, and then his spell damage reduction is getting nerfed at all 3 levels. I mean, Shen's an insane unit, especially in Infiniteam, also in Hacker, though I foresee him being played less in Hacker now that those big Hacker nerfs are going through. So really, I feel like this is for Infiniteam. I think that's completely fine. I mean, he's just a very strong unit, just insane. Like the fights that Shen completely swings by ulting at the right time are numerous, so I think it's completely fine to see this nerf happen. Bel'Veth, on the other hand, Bel'Veth is getting a decent-sized buff, 25% to 30% spell attack speed boost. Honestly, Bel'Veth's a unit that I think is also sort of underplayed. You see a lot of really, really good players like Setsuko playing around Bel'Veth a decent amount of the time. If he has AD items, you just play mech plus Bel'Veth, Bel'Veth Asol as your backline carries, and honestly, this unit can do a lot of work, so I like to see the buff. I'm a little bit afraid it might be an overbuff, but it is a small buff, so hopefully this isn't too much of an overbuff and Bel'Veth doesn't become too dominant. I mean, honestly, for most of this set, AD has been quite hard to play outside of Infiniteam, so I wouldn't mind too much if Bel'Veth was like actually good for a patch, so I think that's completely fine. But yeah, could actually be a big diff. All right, and then some augment changes. Scope of weapons is actually getting a buff. I already thought this was very strong on Jack's boards, so I'm a little bit surprised to actually see the buff. I don't think Jack's boards really needed this. I think if you see scope weapons early and you have Jack's items, you can absolutely play Jack's, even though most people are not playing Jack's. But yeah, I'm a bit surprised to see this buffed, but this will make Jack's even stronger when you can high roll this. And then the last thing is that threat level maximum and double trouble are now mutually exclusive, which is just sort of a nice quality of life thing. You don't want to play them together because threats can't get double trouble. So small thing, but I like that a lot. All right, big changes to hero augments. So boom, biggest change and long time coming. Honestly, this is how it should have literally been at the start of the set. All hero augments now only apply to the strongest unit. So no more double cleansing safeguard, least sins, no more, Rels with hold the line that are insanely tanky. Good change, just straight up, good change. Lucian support augment getting a little bit nerfed. One of the best augments in the game. Lucian comp's getting nerfed and Kais is getting nerfed. So actually, this might be a bit of an over nerf now. I think it's one of the best augments in the game, but both the comps that utilize it are getting really hard nerfs. So this might actually be over nerfed, honestly. I think you could actually keep this completely the same, considering how much those comps are getting nerfed, but we'll see. Pantheon carry augment, the AP getting reduced, I think is completely fine. Once again, sometimes people would roll Pantheon with Lucian. So with Lucian getting nerfed, Pantheon carry gets a bit worse, and Infiniteam getting nerfed, Pantheon carry gets a bit worse. So it's not. This is another sort of like double nerf thing, but this was one of the best augments in the game, so I think it's probably fine. Pantheon support was actually the best hero augment in the entire game, so I do think this definitely needed a nerf. Honestly, would be going to 50% be too much? I'm not sure, but I'm happy to see this being nerfed because it was overperforming way too hard. I also believe this augment is bugged to sometimes give, like if you shield an Infiniteam unit, it also shields the clone sometimes, which is weird. So that's something that I didn't see in the bug fixes at the end, but that exists, just letting you know. Renekton carry getting buffed, perfect. Yeah, this augment sucks, so good to see it buffed. Wukong carry getting extra 8 AP, perfect. This augment is unclickable right now, so I like that. Ezreal carry, Rising Spell Force, now actually working with Parallel is really nice, because yeah, when you used to put Parallel in, it would remove Rising Spell Force. You wouldn't get the actual anything from Rising Spell Force getting Parallel in, so I do like that they actually now synergize together, so that's nice, because this was really weird that it existed. Lee Sin carry buff, I think perfect, especially with the fact that you can't play double Lee Sins anymore, even though they bug fixed it. Was still something you'd see people do, during the mid game sometimes, but I think like this is necessary. They over-nerfed this augment, so bringing it up a little bit is very good. LeBlanc support, also another really, really hard underperforming augment. Even when LeBlanc was broken, during this meta with Hacker, no one was taking this, so I definitely like this getting buffed. It honestly might even not be enough. It's just a small buff, 24% of the unit's HP, which I guess is reasonable. Yeah, I still don't think this augment's gonna be great, but I think it needs to be buffed for sure. Rammus support getting buffed is good, was a pretty weak augment. Also with the Rammus buffs, I think we'll put it in a better spot. Shen support getting nerfed, I think is very appropriate, but it is, once again, compounding nerfs, right? Hit Infinitium, hit Shen support augment, hit Pantheon, both augments, hit Lucian augment. It's a lot of nerfs to Infinitium. So they are all small nerfs, and you're not going to have Shen support augment and these augments, so it's not like those compound, but it will make the comp definitely feel a bit worse. Preemptive nerf to Vayne spread shot, because there's actually going to be, less hackers in the meta, so Vayne spread shot has the danger of becoming really dominant in this meta, so I think that makes actually a ton of sense. I like this a lot. Vex carry buff, yep, beautiful. Vex carry augment sucks now that they made it so that she doesn't heal her entire team, she just heals a couple of units. So I really like this being buffed, because it was underperforming really hard. Echo carry, I still am not a huge player of these weird 4-cost augments where they transform a tank into a carry, but the idea is that you're going to give Echo more backline access by increasing their range, so I'm all for it. Let's try it for sure. But yeah, Leona carry also getting buffed. We saw that game from Juan May, right, where he took this augment and actually did pretty well, so I think there are actually spots where it's takeable, but it is one of the worst performing augments in the game stats-wise, so I do think this is a good buff. It's definitely a step in the right direction. And then the last buff on here is that Urgot support augment is getting buffed. This augment, I don't actually recall how it was performing. Let's go look at the stats real quick, because I assume if they buff it that it was underperforming. I haven't really taken this. Yeah, it's one of the averages, like a 5. So yeah, definitely a good buff, I would say. Haven't seen very many people taking it, and I think there's a good reason for that. But yeah, I think we might have one more page of small changes. Oh, yes. They sped up Gale's cast animation. I like this a lot. This kill unit is very unsatisfying to play as a carry in the early game, just because she takes quite a while to cast, so I love this. Will make her feel like a bit of a better carry. And then yeah, outside of that, just bug fixes. There's one bug fix that I would really like to point out, and it's that Gnar's spell can no longer double crit the primary target if he has a spell crit item. So you were seeing a lot of people build Infinity Edge on Gnar. It actually looked very good in the stats. Why is that? People said, oh, well, it makes the rest of his spell crit. Oh, maybe it's good. And many people argued with me and said, okay, like it doesn't actually make sense that this item is good on him. But, if you looked at the stats on this Gnar unit, it's one of the best performing items, literally better than Deathblade, better than Giant Slayer, even though logically it doesn't really make sense that it would be better. It was due to a bug. It's due to a bug. So TFT is, baby. That's why I think looking at stats is so important, because stats can actually show you stuff that the game cannot tell you. Stats can tell you that Gnar is actually bugged to double crit when the game's never going to tell you that. So love me some stats. Just wanted to stats evangelize for a second. But yeah, that's the whole rundown. The only other thing is cosmetic stuff. Chibi, Malphite coming in. Oh, actually, if people are still here, a cry for help. They're releasing an insanely cool new arena this patch. If you want to see me use that arena on stream, then add me on TFT or add me on League of Legends and send me RP so that I can buy it, because that shit's expensive. Obviously, if you don't have the means, then don't do it. But yeah, I really want to get the new arena. So if people send enough RP, I'll get it. I don't want to spend money, but if it's people's money that they've sent me in RP, then there's nothing I can do about it. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed the rundown. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe, and check out my Twitch and all my other links down below. Thank you. Bye.